St. Augustine's Cathedral, Indiana, March 6, 2024. The body of 24-year-old Vivian Adler was discovered in a secluded construction site, bearing signs of strangulation. Father Vincent Thorne, 58, performed her funeral mass with tearful perfection, his golden cross glinting as he spoke of tragic loss. None of the congregation suspected their beloved priest had wrapped that same cross around his fist 16 days earlier, watching the light fade from Vivian's eyes as he squeezed her throat. But to understand this unholy end, we must return to when Vivian first walked through the cathedral's doors, carrying her violin case and dreams of sacred music. St. Augustine's Cathedral loomed against the grey January sky, its Gothic spires piercing through the morning mist like ancient fingers reaching for heaven. The early morning silence was broken only by the soft click of heels on frozen stone as Vivian Adler made her way up the worn cathedral steps, violin case clutched to her chest like a shield. Inside his third-floor office, Father Vincent Thorne stood at the window, watching. His breath fogged the glass as his eyes followed the young woman's approach. 24 years old, according to her application. Fresh from Juilliard. Unmarried. Alone. Perfect. He adjusted his collar, fingers brushing against the silver cross at his throat, and smiled. Vivian paused at the heavy wooden doors, her free hand tracing the carved angels that had guarded the entrance for over a century. Her dark hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, contrasting with the white wool of her coat. She took a deep breath, sending a small prayer skyward. This was everything she'd worked for since losing her mother, becoming a choir director at a prestigious cathedral, carrying on the musical legacy that had bound mother and daughter together. The door creaked open before she could reach for it. Father Thorne stood in the doorway, tall and imposing in his black cassock, silver hair perfectly groomed despite the early hour. "Miss Adler," he said, voice warm and rich as aged wine. "Welcome to St. Augustine's." His hand engulfed hers in greeting, thumb brushing over her knuckles just a moment too long. "We've been eagerly awaiting your arrival." Vivian felt a flutter of uncertainty in her stomach but pushed it aside. This was God's house. She was safe here. "Thank you, Father. I'm honored to be here." Her voice was soft, musical even in speech, a trait that hadn't gone unnoticed by the priest. Father Thorne led her through the cathedral, his hand hovering at the small of her back as he guided her past towering stained glass windows and ancient wooden pews. Morning light filtered through the colored glass, painting her pale skin in shifting patterns of ruby and sapphire. He watched the play of light across her face, noting how she unconsciously leaned into his touch when he steadied her on the uneven stone floor. "Your father spoke highly of your talents when he called to inquire about the position," Father Thorne said, leading her toward the choir loft. "A devout man, Charles Adler. He's raised you well after your mother's passing." He noted how she tensed slightly at the mention of her mother, filing away the vulnerability for future use. "Yes," Vivian said softly. "Dad did his best. Music and faith were all we had after Mom died." She clutched her violin case closer, knuckles whitening. The loss still felt fresh, even 15 years later. The choir loft was empty this early, the rows of wooden chairs waiting silently for the voices that would fill them later. Vivian's footsteps echoed in the vast space as she approached the organ, running her fingers reverently over the polished keys. "Perhaps you'd favor me with a demonstration," Father Thorne suggested, gesturing to her violin. "The acoustics here are divine." He smiled at his own small joke, but his eyes remained serious, watchful. Vivian nodded eagerly, setting her case down and removing the instrument with practiced care. This she knew. This was safe. Music had always been her sanctuary. She positioned the violin under her chin, drew the bow across the strings, and began to play. Ave Maria filled the cathedral, soaring up into the vaulted ceiling, echoing off stone and wood and glass. Father Thorne watched her sway with the music, eyes closed, lost in the melody. So innocent, so trusting, so unaware of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of his pious exterior. He had spent 25 years building his reputation at St. Augustine's. The respected spiritual leader, the trusted confidant, the man who took special interest in mentoring young people in the parish. None of them ever spoke about what happened in his office during late-night counseling sessions. None of them dared. As Vivian played, Father Thorne moved closer, ostensibly to adjust her posture. "Your bow arm," he murmured, hands sliding along her shoulders, down her arms. "Like this." His chest pressed against her back, breath warm on her neck. She missed a note, recovered quickly, but he felt her pulse jump under his fingers. The music ended, its final notes floating away into the shadows of the cathedral. "Beautiful," Father Thorne said, stepping back but letting his hands linger on her shoulders. "We must arrange private practice sessions. To help you adapt to the space." Vivian smiled gratefully, unaware of how her innocence made his pulse quicken. "Thank you, Father. I'd like that." The following weeks fell into a pattern. Morning mass, choir practice, and increasingly frequent private sessions with Father Thorne. He was always there, watching from the shadows as she directed the choir, appearing at her elbow with a gentle touch and a word of praise. Each touch lasted longer than the last. Each private meeting stretched later into the evening. He learned her routines, memorized her schedule. Security cameras appeared in the choir loft and practice rooms. For safety, he explained. His office collected small pieces of her, a forgotten hair tie, sheet music with her notations, a coffee cup with the impression of her lipstick. During their evening sessions, he drew out her secrets, one careful question at a time. She spoke of her loneliness after her mother's death, her father's emotional distance, her dedication to music as an escape. Father Thorne listened, offered comfort, built trust. His hand would rest on her knee as she confided in him, thumb tracing small circles that made her breath catch. "You have a special gift, Vivian," he would say, voice low and intimate in the darkened church. "God has blessed you. And he has brought you here, to me, for a purpose." Vivian felt herself drawn to him, despite the voice in the back of her mind that whispered warnings. He was a priest, after all, a man of God. When his fingers brushed her skin during violin lessons, when his eyes lingered on her during Mass, when he stood too close in the confessional, it was innocent. Wasn't it? But Father Vincent Thorne was anything but innocent. As January faded into February, he watched his careful groundwork take root. She was beginning to depend on him, to crave his approval, his touch, his attention. Soon, very soon, he would take the next step in their special connection. In his office, hidden behind books of scripture and religious artifacts, a new file was growing. Pictures of Vivian taken from security footage. Notes on her daily habits. Details about her life, her fears, her weaknesses. Father Thorne smiled as he added another photo to the collection. She wasn't his first obsession, but something about her innocence, her pure faith, called to the darkness within him. She would be his greatest conquest, his ultimate corruption. And like all the others before her, she would never see it coming until it was too late. The ancient cathedral bells tolled the evening hour, their sound echoing through empty stone corridors. In the choir loft, Vivian practiced alone, her violin singing hymns of praise while Father Thorne watched from the shadows, his own hymns darker, more dangerous, and growing louder with each passing day. The heavy curtain of the confessional booth couldn't muffle Vivian's racing heartbeat. Through the ornate screen, Father Thorne's silhouette seemed to absorb what little light filtered through the ancient wood. Her fingers trembled as they clutched the rosary, each bead burning against her skin like tiny brands. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." The words caught in her throat. "I've been having thoughts, impure thoughts." Father Thorne's breathing changed, became deeper. "Tell me everything, child. Every detail." His voice carried an edge she'd never heard before, something dark and hungry that made her pulse quicken. "I dream of hands on my skin," she whispered, cheeks burning. "Of kisses that taste of sin. Of a man I cannot have." The last words were barely audible, a confession that could destroy everything. "And this man," Father Thorne's voice dropped lower, intimate in the confined space. "Does he wear a collar like mine?" The confessional door opened with deliberate slowness. Father Thorne filled the frame, his cassock making him seem carved from darkness itself. His hand found her face, thumb tracing her lower lip with possessive intent. "Sometimes," he murmured, "what we call sin is simply God's way of testing our devotion." Their first kiss tasted of sacramental wine and forbidden fruit. His lips claimed hers with savage intensity, months of carefully restrained desire exploding into action. Her rosary beads scattered across the floor as his hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, deeper into their shared damnation. From that moment, the cathedral became their playground of passion. After Mass, while incense still hung heavy in the air, he would pull her into his office. The golden cross around his neck left impressions on her bare skin as he took her against his desk, sacred texts scattering to the floor with each thrust. Her cries of ecstasy mixed with the lingering echoes of hymns in the choir loft, where his hands would slip beneath her robes during late-night practice sessions. The basement storage room became their secret sanctuary. Among boxes of communion wafers and dusty religious artifacts, he would worship her body with unholy devotion. Cold cement floors pressed against her back as he whispered scripture between kisses, twisting holy words into justification for their sins. But their favorite remained the confessional. The same booth where their affair began now witnessed their most sacrilegious acts. Her choir robe hiked up, his cassock parted, prayers turning to moans as they defiled sacred space again and again. The Virgin Mary's statue watched with blind eyes as they coupled beneath it, their passion a mockery of divine love. "God made you for me," Father Thorne would growl, marking her neck with his teeth. She wore high collars now, layers of fabric hiding the evidence of their unholy communion. Every curve of your body, every breath you take, divine creation for divine purpose. He crafted their narrative with diabolic skill, weaving scripture with seduction. During their most intimate moments, he would quote the Song of Solomon, making ancient words of love sound like erotica on his lips. David danced nearly naked before the Lord. He'd whisper as he undressed her, "God understands passion, Vivian. He gave you to me as Eve was given to Adam." Easter Sunday marked a new level of blasphemy. After midnight Mass, while the congregation celebrated resurrection, Father Thorne led Vivian to the altar. Moonlight streamed through stained glass, painting their skin in kaleidoscope colors as they coupled on consecrated ground. Her back pressed against cold marble, legs wrapped around his waist, that golden cross swinging between them like a pendulum marking their descent into damnation. But passion had its price. Father Thorne's manipulation deepened like roots in poisoned soil. He isolated her systematically, his jealousy manifesting as spiritual concern. The new tenor in the choir disappeared after smiling at her too long. Female friendships withered under his disapproval, his whispered warnings about jealousy and misunderstanding. "Only I understand our special connection," he would say, fingers leaving bruises on her hips. "Only I can absolve these sins even as we commit them. This is divine passion, Vivian. Sacred. Special." His control grew absolute. Security cameras appeared in every corner of the church, their glass eyes tracking her movements. Her phone surrendered its secrets to him, messages and calls monitored under the guise of protective concern. She learned to text her location throughout the day, to account for every minute spent away from his watchful gaze. Late nights found him parked outside her apartment, watching her windows until darkness fell. He memorized her routines with obsessive precision. His office became a shrine to his fixation, a drawer filled with stolen moments, discarded hair ties, tissues bearing her lipstick, candid photographs taken without her knowledge. During lonely nights, he would hold these treasures, breathing in her lingering scent, planning their next encounter. The cathedral's ancient stones held their secrets well. Behind its Gothic walls, Father Thorne's obsession grew like a cancer, consuming them both. Vivian transformed under his possession, thinner, darker circles under her eyes, jumping at shadows. But his control was complete. She couldn't imagine life without him now, couldn't separate divine love from this twisted passion that consumed them both. Their love was a poison masquerading as communion wine, a demon wearing angel's wings. And as spring deepened into early summer, neither suspected that their unholy union had created something that would shatter their carefully constructed hell. Father Thorne's obsession mutated into something darker as spring flowers bloomed in the cathedral gardens. His possession of Vivian became absolute, a stranglehold masked as spiritual guidance. The confessional booth, once their haven of passion, transformed into an interrogation chamber. "Tell me again about your conversation with the new altar boy," he demanded, voice soft but laced with venom. "Every word, every glance. Leave nothing out." His fingers wrapped around her wrist through the confessional screen, squeezing until she gasped. "Your soul requires complete transparency, my love." Daily confessions became mandatory. Vivian knelt for hours, recounting every interaction, every phone call, every fleeting thought. Father Thorne dissected each detail, searching for signs of disloyalty. Her knees bruised from the hard wooden kneeler, matching the marks his fingers left on her skin during their increasingly violent encounters. "Show me your phone," became his constant demand. Messages, calls, social media, all laid bare before his scrutiny. When a male colleague from Juliet texted about an upcoming concert, Father Thorne's rage exploded. He took her against the vestry wall, one hand around her throat, the other deleting the message. "You belong to God," he growled, "and I am his instrument." But as Father Thorne's control tightened, Vivian's body betrayed their secret. Morning sickness struck first, subtle waves of nausea during early choir practice. She blamed it on lack of sleep, on stress, on anything but the truth growing inside her. Her breasts became tender, every touch sending sparks of pain through her chest. The choir robe that once hung loose now felt tight across her changing body. During rehearsals, the cathedral's incense, once comforting, now triggered violent waves of nausea. She rushed from the choir loft one morning, barely making it to the bathroom. Father Thorne followed, holding her hair back with deceptive tenderness as she retched. His free hand pressed against her still flat stomach, a gesture that felt more threatening than loving. Fatigue dragged at her limbs like lead weights. During private, prayer sessions in his office, she would sometimes drift off mid-sentence, exhausted beyond reason. Father Thorne watched these changes with growing suspicion, his dark eyes following her every movement. The cathedral itself seemed to be watching. New security cameras appeared weekly, small, discreet lenses hidden behind sacred sculptures and ancient woodwork. In the choir room, 3 different angles captured every movement. Father Thorne's office bristled with hidden devices, recording every sound, every gasp, every confession. For the church's protection, he explained, but his smile never reached his eyes. The cameras followed Vivian everywhere. The church entrance where she arrived each morning, the parking lot where she sat in her car fighting waves of nausea, even the tiny bathroom near the choir loft where she'd been spending increasing amounts of time. His office computer became a shrine to surveillance. Multiple screens showed live feeds, tracking Vivian's movements throughout the day. Father Thorne would sit for hours, rewinding and replaying footage, studying her changing body with obsessive intensity. He noted her frequent bathroom visits, the way she touched her stomach unconsciously, the subtle changes in her breasts. The pregnancy test she tried to dispose of in the church bathroom didn't escape his cameras. He watched her tears, her trembling hands, the moment of realization as 2 pink lines appeared. His fingers tightened on his golden cross until it left impressions in his palm. Vivian's emotions spiraled out of control. One moment she would be directing the choir with fierce concentration, the next dissolving into tears over a missed note. The other choir members whispered behind their hands, theories spreading like poison through the parish. Father Thorne encouraged the rumors of mental instability, all while tightening his grip on her isolation. Food became an enemy. The communion wafer, once a sacred symbol, now turned her stomach. Even the smell of the sacramental wine made her gag. She survived on bland crackers hidden in her choir robe pockets, nibbled secretly between hymns. Father Thorne watched her growing aversion to food with calculating eyes, noting every detail in his leather-bound journal. The cathedral's Gothic architecture seemed to close in around her. Stone angels became surveillance points, their blind eyes hiding camera lenses. Gargoyles leered from their perches, their grotesque faces reflecting her growing horror. Even the Virgin Mary statue, witness to so many of their unholy encounters, seemed to watch her with accusation in its marble eyes. Father Thorne's office, once their passion's sanctuary, transformed into a control center. Monitors lined the walls behind innocuous paintings of saints. Each screen showed a different angle of Vivian's daily routine. Entering the church, practicing alone, kneeling in prayer. He had edited together clips of her most private moments, a digital reliquary of his obsession. The pregnancy was a ticking bomb, its countdown measured in morning sickness and missed cycles. Vivian felt trapped in a web of surveillance and control, her body changing beyond her power to hide it. Father Thorne's keen eyes missed nothing, his possessive touches lingering longer on her subtly swelling belly. Soon, the darkness they'd cultivated in sacred spaces would bear fruit. Their sin had taken root, growing like a cancer in Vivian's womb. The cathedral's ancient stones held their secret for now, but like all unholy things, it would eventually come screaming into the light. 3 pregnancy tests lined the edge of the sink in the cathedral's ancient bathroom, each displaying the same damning truth. Vivian stared at the double lines until they blurred through her tears. She'd known, of course, her body had been screaming the truth for weeks, but seeing the proof made her legs give way. She slid to the cold tile floor, ancient grout rough against her palm. This child was conceived in sin, probably that night on the altar during Easter Vigil. The timing aligned perfectly, a grotesque mockery of resurrection. She remembered Father Thorne's golden cross swinging between them, marking rhythm like a metronome counting down to damnation. Now that same cross felt like it was choking her every time she looked at it during Mass. Panic clawed up her throat as reality set in. A priest's child grew inside her, proof of their sacrilege, their months of unholy passion. Her hand pressed against her still flat stomach, feeling the subtle hardness there. This would destroy everything. Her career, her faith, her father's respect. The parish would implode. Father Thorne would. Father Thorne. The walk to his office felt like a death march. Each step on ancient stone echoed like judgment. She could hear him inside, his rich voice carrying through heavy oak as he counseled another parishioner. She waited, clutching the tests in her pocket like rosary beads, until the door opened and an elderly woman emerged. Father Thorne's warm smile vanished when he saw Vivian's face. Inside. Now. He grabbed her arm, pulling her into the office. The door's lock clicked with terrible finality. What's wrong? She couldn't speak. Instead, she pulled the tests from her pocket, laying them on his desk like evidence at a trial. The silence stretched, heavy as a burial shroud. Father Thorne's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The mask of pious concern shattered, revealing something monstrous beneath. His hand shot out, sweeping the tests into the trash. No, he said, voice deadly quiet. Absolutely not. I'm keeping it, Vivian whispered, one hand protectively covering her stomach. It's our BA. The blow caught her off guard, sending her stumbling against a bookshelf. Religious texts rained down as Father Thorne advanced, his face twisted with rage. Our what? Our sin? Our destruction. His hands found her throat, squeezing. You think I'll let you ruin everything I've built? Please, she gasped, clawing at his fingers. You're hurting. Hurt. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You want to know about hurt? What do you think will happen when this gets out? When everyone knows their beloved priest has been fucking the choir director? When they learn we've been desecrating sacred spaces with our lust? His grip tightened. Your father's reputation, your career, this parish, all destroyed. Is that what you want? He released her suddenly, and she crumpled to the floor, gulping air. Father Thorne straightened his collar, smoothing his mask back into place. You'll get rid of it. Today. I know a doctor who handles special cases. Discreetly. No, Vivian croaked, her throat raw. I won't. His foot connected with her ribs, not hard enough to damage the pregnancy, but enough to make his point. You think this is a discussion? That child is an abomination. Proof of our sin. His voice took on the cadence of a sermon. Think of the shame, the scandal. Your poor father finding out his daughter spread her legs for a priest. The congregation's disgust. The media feeding frenzy. He knelt beside her, stroking her hair with false tenderness. God is testing us, Vivian. Giving us a chance to atone. Remove this sin from your body, and we can continue our special connection. Fight me on this, and I'll destroy everything you love." That night, alone in her apartment, Vivian began fighting back. She downloaded a voice recording app, hiding her phone during their next confrontation. His threats, his rage, his demands for abortion, all captured in digital clarity. She discovered his camera network had blind spots. In these safe zones, she photographed the bruises blooming on her throat, the finger marks on her arms. Each image dated, logged, saved to a secure cloud account. Her journal became a weapon, each entry detailing dates, times, locations. Every violent outburst, every manipulation, every violation of sacred space meticulously documented. She noted security camera positions, mapped blind spots, recorded guard schedules. The text messages were the most damning. Father Thorne's mask slipped in digital form, his messages alternating between love, threats, and religious manipulation. She forwarded each one to a secret email account, building her arsenal. But she wasn't the only one documenting. In Father Thorne's office, a new folder appeared in his filing cabinet. Photos of Vivian's changing body, notes about her symptoms, calculations about conception dates. His obsession had evolved, fixating on the physical proof of their sin growing inside her. Their unholy communion had borne fruit, and now the game had changed. Each of them gathered evidence like weapons, preparing for a war that would paint the cathedral walls with scandal and blood. The cathedral's ancient bells tolled a warning as Father Thorne's sanity began to slip. His sermons turned dark, filled with fire and brimstone, thinly veiled references to fallen women and divine punishment. During communion, his hands shook so violently that he spilled consecrated wine down his cassock, the red stain spreading like an omen. His rage erupted at increasingly inappropriate moments. When an elderly parishioner commented on Vivian's healthy glow, he knocked over a brass candlestick, sending it clattering down the altar steps. During choir practice, his screaming fits about imperfect pitch left children in tears. The mask of piety cracked wider each day, revealing the monster beneath. His messages to Vivian became an endless stream of biblical condemnation mixed with desperate pleading. "Whore of Babylon," one text would read, followed immediately by "My divine love, please don't destroy us." He appeared outside her apartment at all hours, sometimes praying loudly beneath her window, other times hurling stones at the glass. But his obsession left him careless. Late one night, hiding from his stalking, Vivian discovered a locked filing cabinet in the church basement. The lock yielded to a letter opener's persistence, revealing 2 decades of carefully hidden horrors. Manila folders told stories of other young women, choir members, parishioners, church secretaries. Each folder contained photographs, love notes turned to threats, documentation of pregnancies terminated under quiet pressure, carbon copies of church payments, signed confidentiality agreements, transfer papers for priests who asked too many questions. One name stood out, Angela Martinez, choir director in 2015. Her folder was thick with photos showing a pregnancy's progression, then abruptly ended with a death certificate. Suicide, the official report claimed. The autopsy noted finger-shaped bruises on her throat. Vivian's hands trembled as she photographed everything. Decades of systematic abuse, covered up by church officials who valued reputation over justice. Her own folder was already started, bulging with surveillance photos of her growing belly, notes about her movements, plans for handling the situation. She began preparing her escape with methodical care. Evidence was organized chronologically: photos of bruises, recorded threats, surveillance footage she discovered, her detailed journal of abuse. Copies were encrypted and sent to multiple secure locations. A pre-recorded video detailed everything: insurance against her suicide. Legal help came from an unexpected source. A former victim's brother, now a prosecutor specializing in clergy abuse cases, agreed to meet secretly. He helped her document everything properly, prepare restraining orders, build an ironclad case. A domestic violence shelter 3 towns over agreed to take her. She packed a small bag with essentials, hiding it at a trusted friend's house. Her father's summer cabin, remote and defensible, could serve as a backup safe house. Meanwhile, The parish seethed with growing tension. Whispers followed Vivian down church corridors. Her changing body, poorly hidden by flowing choir robes, sparked speculation. Some noticed Father Thorne's increasingly erratic behavior, his obsessive focus on the choir director. The congregation split into factions. Old guard parishioners closed ranks around Father Thorne, dismissing concerns as gossip and lies. Others, particularly women who remembered similar patterns with previous choir directors, watched with growing alarm. Sister Margaret, who had witnessed 20 years of Father Thorne's special friendships, began keeping her own records. She noted his late-night office meetings, the sounds of violence behind closed doors, the bruises glimpsed beneath Vivian's collar. The pressure built like a thunderstorm. Every Sunday service crackled with unspoken accusations. The choir's harmonies took on a strained quality, voices tight with secret knowledge. Even the cathedral itself seemed to groan under the weight of hidden sins. Father Thorne responded by tightening his control over the parish. He dismissed problematic staff members, installed more security cameras, demanded absolute loyalty. His homilies became warnings, reminding the congregation about bearing false witness, about the sins of scandalmongers. But he couldn't control everything. Anonymous letters appeared on the bishop's desk, detailing years of abuse. Police received tips about missing church files, suspicious deaths, financial irregularities. Local reporters began asking questions about high staff turnover and unusual payment patterns. The walls were closing in, and Father Thorne knew it. His attacks on Vivian grew more desperate, more violent. The child in her womb, proof of their unholy union, was a ticking bomb that would destroy everything. Something had to break. Someone had to die. The cathedral's stones had absorbed too many secrets, and now they threatened to speak all at once. The cathedral's ancient clock struck midnight, its deep resonance echoing through empty corridors as Vivian pushed open the heavy oak door to Father Thorne's office. Her evidence was ready: photos, recordings, documents about past victims, all safely uploaded to multiple locations. One last confrontation before she disappeared to the safe house tomorrow morning. She found him kneeling before the crucifix, his silver hair gleaming in candlelight. "I'm leaving," she announced, one hand protectively covering her 4-month pregnant belly. "And I'm taking everything public." Father Thorne didn't turn around. "You know I can't let that happen." His voice was eerily calm, a predator's stillness before the strike. 20 years of victims. Angela Martinez. The others. All the pregnancies you forced them to terminate. Vivian's voice grew stronger. "I have proof of everything. By tomorrow morning, every news outlet in the state will have copies." He rose with fluid grace, turning to face her. The candlelight caught his golden cross, sending shadows dancing across his face. "Do you know what time it is, Vivian?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just past midnight. The hour of absolute darkness, when even God seems to sleep." "Stay back," she warned, reaching for her phone. "I'm recording everything." His laughter was soft, dangerous. "Like the other recordings? The ones in my desk." He pulled open a drawer, revealing her phone's shattered remains. "Found it this morning. You really should have been more careful with your evidence." The realization hit her like ice water. The backup phone in her pocket suddenly felt inadequate. She stepped backward toward the door, but he moved faster. The lock clicked shut with terrible finality. "We could have been so happy," he whispered, advancing slowly. "Our special connection, blessed by God himself. But you had to ruin everything with this abomination." His hand shot out, grabbing her throat. "Just like all the others. Always wanting more, threatening exposure, trying to trap me with their sinful pregnancies." The first blow caught her temple, sending her stumbling against his desk. Religious artifacts scattered across the floor, crosses, prayer books, holy water. The second strike was more precise, his golden cross wrapped around his fist like brass knuckles. Vivian fought back with desperate strength. Her nails raked his face, drawing blood. She screamed, knowing the thick walls would swallow the sound. His hands found her throat again, squeezing with practiced expertise. "Shhhh," he crooned, tightening his grip. Like Angela. Like all of them. Just close your eyes and let go. Let God judge us both. The struggle lasted exactly 7 minutes. She clawed, kicked, tried to protect her swelling belly. But Father Thorne had done this before. He knew exactly how much pressure to apply, how long to hold. He watched the light fade from her eyes with professional detachment. Vivian's last conscious thought was of the tiny life inside her, both of them dying in this unholy place. Then darkness took her. Father Thorne held on for 2 additional minutes, ensuring complete asphyxiation. Time of death, 12:14 a.m. He checked her pulse with clinical precision, noting the purple bruises already forming on her throat. The cover-up began immediately. He'd learned from past mistakes, developed a system. First, the security footage. A few keystrokes erased the past hour from all cameras. Then the physical evidence, her phone, already destroyed, would be disposed of miles away. The body posed a bigger challenge. Previous victims had been easier to stage as suicides, but Vivian's pregnancy complicated things. The autopsy would reveal both conditions. He needed a location that suggested random violence rather than intimate murder. Working methodically, he wrapped her in altar cloths, symbolically shrouding her in the same sacred linens they'd defiled so many times. The cathedral's grounds were too risky. Ground-penetrating radar had almost discovered Angela last year. No, this one needed to be found, but far away. He carried her through the empty church, past the Stations of the Cross where they'd made love, past the confessional where it all began. His car waited in the secluded clergy parking area, trunk already lined with plastic. The construction site 3 miles away would work perfectly. Empty, isolated, dangerous area. He positioned her body carefully, arranging evidence of a random attack. The pregnancy would be a tragic detail that helped sell the story of a stranger's violence rather than a lover's revenge. Back at the cathedral, Father Thorne spent 2 hours cleaning. Bleach erased blood spatter from his office walls. Broken objects were replaced with identical spares he kept for such occasions. Her scattered belongings were bagged for later disposal in various dumpsters across town. The sun rose on a perfectly ordered office, a pristine crime scene, and a priest preparing to perform morning mass. Father Thorne straightened his collar, brushed lint from his cassock, and practiced his expression of shocked grief in the mirror. The performance had to be perfect. After all, he'd had 20 years of practice mourning his victims. The excavator's blade struck something soft instead of hard-packed earth. Construction halted as workers investigated, horror dawning on their faces. Vivian's body lay partially exposed, altar linens now stained with soil. The medical examiner would later note 2 deaths, mother and unborn child, approximately 16 weeks gestation. Detective Mia Martinez stared at the crime scene photos, her hand unconsciously touching her throat. The bruising pattern was hauntingly familiar, identical to her sister Angela's autopsy photos from 5 years ago. Another choir director, another suicide that never felt right. The investigation moved with ruthless precision. Evidence technicians photographed every angle, collected soil samples, documented drag marks. Vivian's carefully arranged pose spoke of intimate knowledge. This was personal, staged, methodical. The cathedral's reaction split along fault lines of denial and revelation. Father Thorne performed her funeral mass with practiced grief, his voice breaking at perfectly timed intervals. But Detective Martinez watched his hands, noting how they mimicked the bruising pattern on Vivian's throat. Interviews revealed the pattern. 20 years of young women cycling through choir director positions. Each departure marked by quiet payments, sealed records, and Father Thorne's sad explanations of personal troubles. The break came from an unexpected source. Sister Margaret approached detectives with 2 decades of careful notes. Times, dates, suspicious injuries, late-night office sounds. She'd documented everything, waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. Vivian's digital trail proved devastating. Cloud accounts yielded photos, recordings, detailed journals. The evidence she'd gathered about past victims created a damning timeline. Most crucially, backup phones recorded both her murder and Father Thorne's methodical cleanup. The arrest happened during Sunday Mass. Detective Martinez took particular satisfaction in handcuffing him before his congregation, the silver bracelets replacing his golden cross. His mask finally cracked, revealing the monster beneath as he spat curses and prophesied of divine vengeance. The media explosion was nuclear. Headlines screamed of unholy desire, murdered mothers, decades of systematic abuse. Each revelation triggered new investigations across multiple parishes. More victims emerged, their stories painting a portrait of institutional complicity stretching back generations. Church officials scrambled to contain the damage, but sealed records mysteriously leaked. Financial documents showed hush money patterns. Internal memos revealed deliberate cover-ups, victim intimidation, evidence destruction. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Father Thorne maintained his pious facade until confronted with Vivian's final recording. His breakdown on the witness stand became infamous, a viral video of sacred authority crumbling into profane rage. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Multiple life sentences without possibility of parole. But the true victory came in the reforms that followed. The diocese implemented mandatory reporting systems, external oversight, victim support services. Surveillance systems now protected against predators rather than enabling them. St. Augustine's Cathedral underwent exorcism of a different kind. Vivian's music program was renamed in her honor, its scholarship fund supporting abuse survivors. The choir loft where their unholy passion began now hosts domestic violence awareness concerts. Former victims found healing in unexpected ways. Support groups formed in church basements, reclaiming sacred spaces for truth-telling. Sister Margaret's detailed records became a template for abuse prevention programs nationwide. Detective Martinez personally supervised the cold case review of her sister's death. Angela's suicide was officially reclassified as homicide, her body exhumed from unconsecrated ground and reburied with full honors. Father Thorne's confession to her murder brought closure to a wound 20 years deep. The cathedral's ancient stones still hold their secrets, but now they serve as warnings rather than enablers. Stained glass windows shed light on dark corners where predators once lurked. The confessional booth where it all began was converted into a memorial, its wooden panels inscribed with victims' names, a testament to sins exposed and justice finally served. In the end, Vivian's death accomplished what her life could not. Her evidence, her courage, her ultimate sacrifice forced the light into generations of darkness. The child she carried, though never born, helped birth a new era of accountability. The last entry in her journal, written the night before her murder, reads, "Some sins cannot hide in sacred shadows forever. Truth, like God's light, finds a way to shine."